Alright guys, so as you guys know, next class period you guys are taking your test, and so I want you guys to write the following 5 questions down on a piece of paper, as it's a good start to get to your study guide. So go ahead and write the 5 ways to prove triangles are congruent, and when proving other parts of congruent triangles, what theorem would you use? And then in congruent triangles, how many total congruent statements are there? You also need to write down the distance formula and what you know about parallel and perpendicular slopes. Alright, so the 5 ways to prove triangles are congruent is side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg. Now remember, with hypotenuse leg, we have to have a right triangle. There is no other cases. Okay, now when proving other parts of congruent triangles, we use CPCTC. So again, that was corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. In the next question, in congruent triangles, how many total congruent statements are there? We know that there is a total of 6. 3 pairs being congruent sides and 3 pairs being congruent angles. We have to make sure that we prove all 6 if I'm asking you to prove all 6 in a proof. Otherwise, we can go back and use any of the 5 methods that we just said at the very top. Also on the test, you need to remember and know the distance formula. I would not give it to you this time. So you need to know that the distance formula is the square root of the difference of the x's squared plus the difference of the y squared. So remember the song where it goes, you take the x's and subtract them, the y's and then subtract them, square them both, them add them, the distance formula, take the square root. Okay, now remember, there's a difference between the distance and the slopes. Okay, distance tells us how long it is, or if it's congruent. Slopes tell us whether it's parallel and perpendicular. With parallel slopes, the slopes are congruent, or we could say they're equal or the same. And with perpendicular slopes, we know that they are opposite reciprocals. And a reminder that reciprocal means to flip the number. So if you had a number of 2, the reciprocal would be 1/2. So as I review what's on the exam, I want you to take note of the things that I'm mentioning. So there are 5 proofs on the test, and you will need to know how to do the proofs. And so I would suggest going back through all the proofs that we did in our notes, as well as our homework assignments. You can check all of the answer keys to make sure that you did the proofs correctly, or at least you had the same number of steps that I did. I would really suggest looking at the proofs that we did in our notes though, because especially the ones that go over side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg. Okay, those are really important proofs to make sure that you take a look at. On top of the proofs, you will also need to find angle measures. And what I mean by that is, if I were to give you a triangle, could you figure out the missing angles? So let's say if I had this triangle here, and I was to label my angles. Let's say this one's 40, this one's 35, this one's 45. Let's call this one B and C. How would you find the measure of angle A, the measure of angle B, and the measure of angle C? Well, you really can't find the measure of angle C, but you could probably work your way around to find A. I would probably suggest starting with B, because you already have the triangle on the left side, and if you see what I'm talking about, we have this triangle over here that already has 2 angle measures. Okay, so remember, angle measures in a triangle add up to 180, so I would take 45 plus 35 plus B is equal to 180, So B would have to equal 80. Okay, and that's because 45 plus 35 is 80. So then when you subtract 80 from 100, or from 180, excuse me, you get 100. So the measured angle B is 100 degrees. So I'm going to go back and label that there. After we do that, then we can find the other one. Well, I know that C and B are supplementary because, well, they're adjacent and they make a straight line. And so by linear pair, that means the two angles are equal to 180. So if B is 100, that means C is equal to 80 degrees. Okay. Now, in order to find A, you can, again, do the triangle angle sum theorem. So if C is 80 degrees, okay, let's try to squeeze that in there, 80 degrees, and I know the other angle here on top is 40 degrees, and then I could say, well, 40 plus 80 plus A is equal to 180. Well, 80 plus 40 is 120. When you subtract 120 from 180, you get A is equal to 60 degrees. So there I have all of the angle measures, right? Now, if you already knew how to do that, congratulations, it's good, because you'll actually get some points there for that one. But make sure when you're doing this, you are subtracting it from 180 or you're adding it to 180. Whatever you're doing, make sure that you're dealing with the triangle angle sum theorem, which, going back to chapter 3, that said that was 180 degrees. What you also need to know on your test is corresponding parts given a congruent statement. So if I were to give you something like triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, could you tell me all of the corresponding parts? So if I asked you angle A, well, what's angle A congruent to? It should be angle D, right? Or if I asked you, what if I gave you AC? AC is going to be congruent to what side? Hopefully you're saying segment DF. Okay, so you would have to be able to tell me all 6 parts there. Now, if we were to go on and continue that, and if we were to say, okay, well, if I have two triangles, and let's continue to say that that's triangle A, B, C, and this is D, E, F, and then if A is corresponding to D, then if I'm saying, well, if I'm saying that A is 4x and D is 2x minus 1, let's do minus 2. Then how can I find x? Well, you would say, well, because A is congruent to D, like we just said right over here, then you could say 4x is equal to 2x minus 2 because of the definition congruence, right? If two things are congruent, they're also equal. So I get 2x is equal to negative 2, so x is equal to negative 1. Okay, I can also say the same thing with my side links, right? So make sure you know how to do that whole setup. And again, this was back from section 1, where we knew corresponding parts were congruent, and so we had to set them equal to each other to find your missing values. Okay. In addition to that, you also need to know your equations. So do you remember all of the equations that we had from chapter 3? So what I mean by that is point slope form, slope intercept form, and also slope. Okay, so pause the video and go ahead and fill in those blanks, and then once you write them all down, go ahead and continue pressing play and see to make sure that you got those correct. Alright, so let's compare what you have and hopefully what I have. So point slope, you should have had y minus y1 is equal to m times the quantity x minus x1. Slope intercept, you should have y is equal to mx plus b. And slope should be rise over run, which equals y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. Okay. Now remember with slope, it's rise over run. So what's the rise? That's the y's. The runs are the x's. Okay. Now why do I need to know this? Is because if you remember back on here, we said, well, you got to know your parallel slopes and your perpendicular slopes. Well, if you remember your equations, you can do that. So for example, let's talk about one where we could say, well, I want to go through the point 1, 4, and it has to be either parallel or perpendicular to the equation, let's say y is equal to 2x plus 6. Okay, so what I want to know is, again, the equation that goes into, that makes parallel to the y equals 2x plus 6, and I also want a perpendicular equation that goes with 2x plus 6 and goes to the point 1, 4. Again, remember that your current slope, okay, my current slope is going to be 2, right? And that's just this value over here from y equals mx plus b. Parallel slope, well, first slide we said parallel slope is the same. So if this slope is 2, then our parallel slope is 2. We use our point slope, so y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. And we're going to just plug in the missing values. Well, we take y minus, the y1 is 4, our m is 2, and our x1 is a 1. Okay, distribute through, and so we're going to get y minus 4 is equal to 2x minus 2. To get y by itself, I'm going to add 4 to both sides, so y is equal to 2x plus 2. Now for perpendicular, we're going to do the same thing, except we know that our perpendicular slope was, remember, opposite to reciprocal. So what's opposite of positive? Negative. What's the reciprocal to? We said that's 1/2. Okay, so my new slope is negative 1/2. We're going to use the same formula. So y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1, and plug in the information that we know. So I do y minus 4 is equal to 2, not 2, let's try that again, negative 1/2 times x minus 1. Multiply through, so y minus 4 is equal to negative 1/2 x. Negative times a negative is a positive. 1 times 1/2 is positive 1/2. Y is then equal to negative 1/2 x plus 1/2 plus 4. Well, I already know that's going to be 4 and 1/2, right? Because 1/2 plus 4 is 4 and 1/2. But I want you guys to write this in mixed, not in mixed form, but I want it in proper. Okay, so remember improper. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 1/2 plus 4 over 1, right? Remember, any number, any whole number by itself is going to be over 1. In order to add fractions, I have to have common denominator. So my common denominator is going to be a 2. Well, in order to get the 1 to be a 2, I multiply by 2. So whatever I do it to the bottom, I have to do the top. So 4 times 2 is 8. So then I get 1 plus 8, which is 9 over 2. So my final equation should be y is equal to negative 1/2 x plus 9/2. Okay, there'll be a couple of problems like this on the test, so make sure that you really know how to do this. And if you don't, double check and go back to chapter 3 to make sure that you understand it. Alright, since we're on the topic of parallel and perpendicular, you also need to know if that you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, do you know the angle relationships? So let's say if this was angle 1, angle 2, angle 3, angle 4, angle 5, angle 6, angle 7, angle 8. Alright, so then if I were to ask you what's the relationship between angle 1 and angle 4, so again that's 1 and angle 4, hopefully you would say those are vertical angles, right? Or if I asked you angle 1 and angle 8, hopefully you would say those are alternate exterior angles, right? So I'm going to say vertical angles, alternate exterior angles. If I did 4 and 5, angle 4 and angle 5, like alternate interior angles, right? Or angle 3 and angle 5 are same side interior. So you need to make sure you know those relationships. You will not get to use the sheet that you did on chapter 3. So make sure that you know how to do that. In addition to that, let's say if I were to say, well, if angle 6 is going to be, let's say angle 6 is 90 degrees, how would you know what angle 3 is? Well, 3 and the 90 are in alternate interior, so 3 would also have to be 90 degrees, right? And then if I asked you to find 2, 2 should also be 90 because it's corresponding. Or if I were to ask you find the measure of angle 8, hopefully you would say, well, 90. Then this one would also be 90 because the two angles would be a linear pair and they're supplementary, right? So make sure that you know all of that. Okay. The last thing that you need to know in the test would be to know the differences of the triangles. And so we had the isosceles triangle, we had the right triangle, and we had the equilateral. Okay, so with the isosceles triangle, we know that we had 2 congruent legs, and we also had 2 congruent base angles. In a right triangle, we had 1 right angle. And an equilateral triangle meant 3 congruent sides, which also meant 3 congruent angles. Well, if I had 3 congruent angles, I call that equiangular, right? So you need to know both terms for that one triangle. Now, if all the sides were congruent, then we could say that they're equal. If I were to look at the angles, each one of these angles should be a specific measure. Remember, we talked about it in the class, and so we said if all the angles add up to 180, and then we have all of them being the same, well then we're basically saying we have 3x, right? So if we divide by 3, 180 divided by 3 is 60. So that means in an equilateral triangle, each degree is 60 degrees. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up everything that you have on the test. So you just have to know all the relationships within the triangle, how you're going to find sides and distances and lengths and missing angles, which isn't as extensive as we normally have it, right? So again, the 5 proofs, you only have to do 4 of the 5 proofs that's on the test, so it's not too bad. What I suggest now is that you go over to Google Classroom, right, that you should already be on, but go ahead and return back to Google Classroom, and there is a Chapter 4 review assignment. I would suggest that you do the review assignment. It is for credit, so make sure that you get it all completed by Tuesday. It's very much like the test, and so if you follow through with that, you answer some of the questions, you'll understand how to do them, and hopefully you'll do pretty well on it. You are more than welcome to take that again as many times as you need to. If you also read through the prompt, you also can see that there's an extra credit opportunity. So if you scroll down through Google Classroom, you can see that you can pull up the extra credit opportunity, or you can grab one from the substitute. Okay, and the extra credit again is going to help you hopefully with reviewing for the test. And so best of luck to you guys. Make sure that you are working on either the review or the extra credit assignment. If you have any questions, please email me and let me know if you have any questions or if you need help on a particular problem. Otherwise, we will see you on Tuesday for your Chapter 4 test.